Arrangement is one of the canons of rhetoric, and the name of it already tells us a little bit about how that old idea of how to prepare a speech affected the idea of the structure of a speech. We often use that term structure to talk about the way that different aspects of the speech connect to one another. If we think about it as arrangement, we see that the importance that is placed on invention, that we're coming up with discrete different aspects of the speech in the invention stage of a speech and arranging them for a various purpose afterwards. And I think that is a useful way of thinking about arrangement, but not the only way. So the kind of arrangement that you come out with really depends on the context of the speech. It really depends on the audience. And you're going to get tired of hearing me say that throughout the course, but it really is the case. We could say, very broadly speaking, that there are some very general ideas about the general expectations that audiences have for the beginning, middle, and end of a speech. If we are just really only trying to inform somebody about something, and I'm a little suspicious of that idea, whether we're only ever trying to inform somebody, I feel like we typically are trying to do more than that in almost any situation. But even in that kind of imaginary ideal situation, we might say that the basic idea of the structure of the speak would be the general idea of what you're talking about, a general overview, the detailed specific information, and again at the end to zoom out back to the general, how all those details that we now have and share together, both speaker and audience, how they relate back to that general concern. So that general specific general structure might be a general framework for thinking about any kind of informative speech that you might be giving. However, there are many other kinds of speech. When you're trying to persuade someone, it's not always the best idea to begin with a really generalized idea that might come off as being overly general. It might come off as being that you're not really in the same relationship to the issue as the audience is. Maybe the audience is already really familiar with the issue. So even that basic idea isn't always going to work. So I'm going to give you a few techniques for how to think about structure that relate to the speeches that you actually have made. So the first technique is going to be make a sentence out of your speech. This takes a little bit of work, and it's a little bit unusual when you first try to do it. But the reason that you can make a sentence out of each part of your speech is because a speech is made out of language. And the way that this might look would be, after you have come up with the basic ideas of what you want in your speech, what you're trying to do is connect those basic ideas into one complex sentence. What we're trying to avoid is a sentence that's just connected by and. That kind of a structure where things are just joined together, glued together almost, is a loose, baggy structure. What we want to see is certain kinds of subordination, certain kinds of logical relationships between the structure and aspects of a speech. So it might look something like this. Although X and despite Y, Z, because A, B, C, D, even if those are connected by ands. And finally, if you're thinking of Y, we should also consider Z, or however it might be arranged. Of course, I'm speaking in abstract terms here, but if you can get your speech into a sentence and see all those relationships between the different parts of your speech, it's going to be able to make your speech flow very naturally. Your audience will feel the relationships between the different parts of your speech without feeling that it's like a superimposed structure on top of it. So I highly encourage you to try this technique of taking the different parts of the speech, making them into clauses or sentence fragments, and then combining them into one sentence. At the end of it, in addition to that little extra work of making sure that your speech is well structured, you also have a really nice summary of your speech, which allows you to kind of look at it and say, is everything I want to say in there? Of course, not all of the detail of what you want to say is in there, but are there any big ideas that maybe you're missing, things that your audience might be concerned with that you haven't addressed? So that's one of the things that I think you can always do for any speech, is try to kind of reduce it into a complex sentence. Another idea is to simply do an outline. And lots of people will recommend this to you, and it's a tried and true method, which is to say, I'm going to have a main point, indent in my outline, and as I'm writing this up, all my subsidiary points. So that gives you a structure that, again, kind of does the same thing as the sentence form because it shows you that some things are subordinated under point A, one, two, three, point B, one, two, three, things like that. And it gives you that very rough sense of the logical relationships between the various parts of the speech. It doesn't give you the full relationship as the sentence does, but it does give you some sense of that. It also is sometimes helpful when you're actually speaking to be able to look at something like that visually as your notes. So those one of the benefits of that style of preparing and looking at your structure and examining your structure is you can actually use that to speak from. It's not always going to work, but it will work in a lot of situations. Finally, another test or technique for structure is to try to imagine your speech, and this may be a little bit strange, actually as an experience. And if we're thinking of the speech as an experience for the audience, what we want to ask ourselves is what is the audience going to be thinking at each aspect of the speech? So maybe on my audience, I'm imagining is starting out as kind of bored, waiting to be interested, who knows, whatever your kind of basic state is. And I'm trying to think of in each part of the speech, how have I moved my audience? Now, that's a really high level way of thinking about structure, but it really is the most audience centric way that you can use. And so I think that all three of these methods have something to say for them. And I really would recommend that you try all of them out, see which works best for you in different situations, and let me know.